Would someone be able to give me a bit of an overview?
So we have close to 40 participants who are people who've had lived experiences or have been caregivers. We also have a few healthcare professionals. We have people representing close to 18 states from the northeast part of India to we have people from the south part of India as well, also Delhi and other places. So yes, so we have a diverse group, but we have a few healthcare professionals on the group as well this time.
All right, thank you. So thank you for explaining that to me, and I'm really glad to be here today. I have a deck prepared on resource mobilization, focusing primarily on fundraising, but I would be very happy for you to ask me questions as we go along because I prefer to keep it interactive. And while I may have focused a lot of the learning session on fundraising and drawing from the experience of CanKids, where I have myself led the fundraising department, the resource mobilization department till about middle of last year. Nevertheless, if you have questions or if you have doubts or if you want me to focus on something specifically, then you could put it into the chat and I could try to answer your questions as we go along. Is that okay? Is that good? Everybody is agreeable to this idea? All right. So this is the session. Can you see my screen? Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Yes, yes. All right. And we're going to talk about resource mobilization. And also, wait a second, I'm going to try and put this on a full screen. Yeah. We're trying to do this in 4 different parts. The first part is the importance of engaging partners, working with other people to mobilize resources for your organization or your foundation, or for that matter, perhaps organizing resources yourself for maybe somebody you are caring for. Admittedly, much of the presentation that I'm going to give you and the talk that we're going to do is around the presupposition that you have an organization. But I would like us to talk also about I'm a caregiver and I need to raise funds for perhaps my family member and how would I be able to do that? Or I would like to raise more resources, and we could broad base the discussion for that, right? So understanding the importance of engaging partners, the first thing. Then we'll talk a little bit about how to create a budget, how to allocate the funds, and how to raise funds within your setup. We'll then talk a little bit about how to harness the resources that are available, either within the environment or internally within your organization. And finally, we'll talk about how to create and manage a team. So this is the curriculum for this particular session. But that said, if you have specific other areas that you want me to cover, then if you can put it into the chat, I will try to cover that as well. I just want to say a little bit more about CanKids, the NGO that I have founded. I know that we've already talked about some of this already, but why I would like to do this is in the context of the fact that we started small. We started with only about 8 lakh rupees a year. This was in the year 2004. And over a period of time, we have grown, and we have grown across the country. And as we've grown across the country, we have mobilized and mobilized and mobilized resources. And as you see this, you will see that those resources that we've mobilized could be partnerships, a lot of partnerships. CanKids has 107 partnerships with hospitals across the country. We have partnerships with state governments, and we work towards creating memorandum of understandings for our state government projects. And we have 3 so far, and hopefully another 3 coming up this year out of the 14 state projects that we have. We have partnerships when we set up a care center, for one, because we don't own any property of our own. So whether it is that someone agrees to let us use their space, or it is that we are renting it out, We need to partner with many, many, many people to be able to run a care center. It's not just something that any organization can do by themselves. We also have a public-private partnership with the Bombay Municipal Corporation in Mumbai, and we run a special school there. So again, a PPP with a government or a government body is again a partnership which is very, very highly productive and very highly useful. We have a pediatric palliative care center in Delhi. And again, till recently, the space he had was for free. We work with a lot of different people within the Delhi government to make sure that this one and only pediatric palliative care center works. So as you can see, as we have grown over time, well, our team has grown. Our team size today is over 2,400 people, out of whom maybe about 350 are staff. But we have a big parent group of over 1,100 members in our parent support group. And these are different types of members. They could be an Awaaz member, as we call it, which means just a parent who signed up to be a member and is willing to tell people that childhood cancer is curable, is willing to send them to wherever they need to go for support. We have a big survivor group. And again, our survivor group is pan-India. We have chapters, 10 chapters within that. And the survivors are not just that we help them, but the survivors are an awesome force when it comes to creating awareness, advocating, participating in flash mobs, spreading the message during awareness months, all of that. Some of them come and work with us, they intern with us, but a large number of them out there creates a workforce. It creates a force that helps the organization significantly. The same way the parents who work with us, they are parents of survivors, they are parents of caregivers, parents who may have lost their children to cancer. And again, we have worked on this almost like a partnership, because not only do we provide them livelihoods and train them to do better counseling, they make great patient navigators. So again, the reason I wanted to capture CanCase is to show you how much resource we are mobilizing through partnerships, through the funds that we raise, through even the beneficiaries. Our beneficiaries are now our partners. Our parent groups, our survivor groups, actually are a big part of the resource. We have a very ambitious volunteer management program. We encourage adults to come and volunteer with us. And we also have a summer internship program where we provide certificates for 120 hours of a project. We provide certificates for 30 hours of volunteering for younger children. And again, that's the KidsCan part of CanKids, but again, it provides a lot of resource. So as we go through the thread of the next hour or so, we will, as I said, talk much more perhaps about raising material funds, but I did want to put this out there right up in front, because the first section that we're going to talk about will be about creating partnerships. So what's resource mobilization for all of you? It's an activity that involves securing new and additional resources for your organization. And if you are a caregiver in the group and you're only saying, I need to maybe mobilize resources to help someone who needs help, be it my neighbor, be it someone in the family, then it would still apply in the same way, right? It's an activity that involves securing new funds or new resources or getting additional resources in. Right? And also, it's an activity that involves making better use of and maximizing what you already have. So I think that's a really important point when it comes to NGOs, because we do need to make sure that the funds that we raise or the resources that we have, we put to full and maximum use. So finally, it's a process that will identify the resource that is essential for what you want to do. So it's not just that do we have resources, you need different types of resources to actually achieve your organization's mission. In Pallium, we do a lot of advocacy work. So the kind of resources we need in Pallium are maybe different from perhaps another organization that may do a lot more of grassroots level activity across the country, right? So you have to look at exactly what is the type of resource you want. and then basis that create your own resource mobilization strategy. Right, any questions so far? Okay, so again, if you look at this, these are some different types of resources. And it's interesting, isn't it, that I've got right up on top moral resources. So what are the moral resources in an organization? These are to do really with the support that your organization is able to have. Again, at Pallium, we have a lot of goodwill. We have a lot of recognition and a lot of support, driven perhaps by Dr. Raj himself. But there is a lot of support that we have, and that we have to value as a resource to the organization. That means that that goodwill that we have helps us actually to achieve a lot more than simply saying, do we have adequate amounts of funding, right? What are cultural resources? Cultural resources are knowledge that is already widely available. And examples could be, you know, information on the net, Google. I love Google. I think we all love Google today. The trick is how to ask the question to get the answer, but gone are the days that you needed to go to a library to get information. You just use Google and it's there. But cultural resources actually work around how to do various things, how to run a meeting, how do I form an organization, what are the pitfalls, what are the compliances, all of that. And this kind of knowledge becomes very, very important if we want, if you're an individual, if you're a caregiver and you want to try and find out where should I go for treatment, how can I ensure that I get funding, how can I ensure that I get all the kind of information I need, then making sure that the information is available is very, very important. So on the one hand, the resource that you need to get your goals done. On the other hand, for organizations like ours, what is the information that we're putting out there so that more people can benefit from these resources that we have. The kind of knowledge base that we have at CanKids or we have at Pallium is huge. Are we doing fair justice to sharing this knowledge so that we actually share our resources more widely, right? So coming to the third type of resource, which is the social or the organizational resource, which is to do with spreading the message. All causes, all NGOs work around some particular message that we want to spread. And it's important to be able to use the resources wisely to spread this. So we could, for instance, say we want to do awareness and we say, all right, I'm going to spend crores and crores of rupees planning an awareness campaign. On the other hand, we could say, all right, let's fix meetings in the community. Let's ask schools, and shall we partner with schools so that we can spread the message? Shall we find the right type of people who will work with us, volunteers who work with us to spread the message, who will share the information, will create the, who basically are available. And this then saves an organization a lot of money. I remember one time somebody said we should put out a national ad for one of the cancers, for eye cancer. And we looked at how expensive that was, right? Equally, people will tell you, let's spend a lot of money on PR, let's spend a lot of money on awareness. And sometimes you have to, and sometimes you have to look at what's out there that we can actually use, who can we partner with so that we can maximize this resource, right? Coming next to material. So material is the easiest one out of all of these for us to understand, which is what are the funds that we've raised, what are the financial resources we've raised, what is the physical capital, how do we get this, can we get it as a donation in kind, do we actually have to outlay the money ourselves? And I know that at CanKids, when we set up a home, we may have a budget for, let's say, corporate social responsibility, but then we also make sure that we get a lot of donation in kind so that we don't have to keep expanding our budget and making the project bigger and bigger. So that's material resources. And finally, human resources. Human resources are very, very important for NGOs because we need to have a lot of experience, a lot of skill, a lot of expertise. A lot of people think that working in the not-for-profit space is about seva. Yes, it is about seva. But as an organization grows, as it scales up, the expertise becomes important. And if we have to pay for the expertise, it can be very, very expensive. So the more we're able to find people who would volunteer for us, who'd like to work with us, to actually help us, people on the board, people on our committees, people who like to volunteer time. And yet volunteering is not an easy activity because volunteers can be whimsical. Volunteers may choose to come in and then not come in at all. And there is a tendency then as you scale to say, let me just hire staff, right? But again, whether you hire staff or they're volunteers, they're key and vital resource for any organization or for any effort. And hence, this resource is important to pay attention to. So moral, cultural, social, or organizational resources, material resources, and human resources. That is broadly the breakup for all forms of resource mobilization. Let's look at the first one then, and that was to do with understanding the importance of engaging partners, right? Going back to the previous slide, we talked about, if you look at right through, if you look at the slide that I put up at CanKids, actually, yes. Sorry?
There's some disturbance. I think we can continue.
Okay. So understanding the importance of engaging partners, right? Would anybody like to chip in at this point and tell me why you think having partners could be important? Anyone?
Yeah, I guess it could be because if we don't, if we try to do everything on our own, it's not going to be possible because the need is so huge that we need to network. We need to use, like you rightly said, use all the possible resources, our personal contacts, our own personal finances, if it comes to that, or any resource, all the 5 areas that you mentioned. We will have to pitch in and try to get others to join us so that it will be more focused on getting the best out of what is available to us. I hope that's
absolutely. That's correct. So whatever we do, whichever way we're doing it, it's important for us to look at how we can engage with people, right? And that can actually impact the strategic future of the organization. So if we look at partner engagement, we need to look at it from 3 different aspects. There's the why, right? And the why is what do you want to achieve and how will your partner engagement support this?
Poonam,
right?
Sorry, 1 second. Poonam, can you make that, turn that into slideshow? So it's,
yeah, sure.
Thanks.
Okay. So the first piece of it is obviously, what do you want to achieve, right? And this is what Sam, you spoke about, right? That we have to look at engaging with partners, but if we want to engage with a partner, we first have to look internally within ourselves and say, what is it that I'm trying to achieve, right? So do you work with active elderly is what, Sam? Hello? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm the co-founder, you can say. I'm the co-founder. I started this website within just the purpose of trying to create awareness about challenges of aging and how I could help with whatever resources I have.
Correct. So if we look at your aim, if you look at what you're wanting to achieve, yes, you could set up a website on your own, but there may be a point in time when you feel that I need to have some partnership with the organization that's working with the elderly on the ground, right? Because it may not always be possible. People will reach out to you and ask you questions and then say, but where do I get this? Or how do I actually get help? Or how, is there someone who will take me to the hospital when I need to go for an appointment, right? So a natural thing would be that once you have worked out what your own strategy is, what you're planning to do, then you have to sit down and think, okay, given this, why would I need to partner with, right? Why do I need to look at partners? How can I enhance and achieve much more of my vision or much more of my mission statement by actually looking for partners? And I can tell you something, that it's actually not that easy to do because you're so busy doing your own thing. We're so busy, we're so active. Finding a partner or trying to figure out who you can work with and how you can do that is not that easy. But I want us to focus on the why piece, so that that would sort of make us understand that if this is my vision, or this is my mission, this is my strategic plan, how is it going to benefit me to actually partner with? And once I do that, I'm going to look at, all right, what are the areas that I can partner with? It's not that you need to partner with someone for everything. So you may have different types of partners, and that'll come in the who part. But what is it? What is it that you want to partner on? Do you want to partner on the mission itself? Do you want to partner on certain activities? Do you want to partner to raise resources? Do you want to actually look at maybe building up or empowering another group so that they can work with you at the local level? And at CanKids, that is something, for instance, recently in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, we've been focusing a lot on that. Because as we grew, we found that we'd scaled up. But at the same time, it was very difficult for us to have a field presence everywhere. So it made sense for us to find local partners and say, let's partner with a smaller local NGO. Let's help to build them up as well. And let's maybe even provide them initial seed funding. But as we do that, it will help us to have the grassroots presence rather than recreating a grassroots presence everywhere ourselves. So it made sense. That what made sense for us to actually look out for partnering with local NGOs, right? So that's the aspect of the what. And finally, the who. So who would we want to partner with, right? And therefore, it's important that once you've defined why you want to, what is your own purpose, what you want to achieve, you go on to looking at which aspect of your work or exactly where the partnership is going to be most strategically important for you. Perhaps at the beginning, you look at smaller partnerships. As you grow, you start looking more and more at more strategic partnerships, right? And then finally, you look at who are these people, right? Who are the people who you can partner with to actually achieve the impact? Yes. Sorry. Okay. So, and when you do this, you know, these are some of the questions you might like to ask yourself, right? Who is directly responsible from the other, maybe from the partner you've identified? Who will be most influential in a particular area or a community or an organization? Remember when I talked to you about the awareness, I said, maybe sometimes schools are great because schools are great to partner with for awareness, right? Because they want to bring, maybe they want their kids to be community sensitive as well. And at the same time, large numbers easily able to communicate your message, right? So it's important to look at what exactly that particular organization or individual can do. Within the organization or individual, who actually will be able to be the right person to partner with, who is influential on a particular issue sometimes. On the other hand, you can also look at who can obstruct a decision if not involved, right? Or who has been involved with a particular issue in the past. So these are some of the questions that you would look at when you started looking at how important it would be for you to partner and how you should go about doing this. Any questions on this so far? Any comment? Okay.
Ma'am,
yes.
May I ask one question? Am
yes.
I audible?
Yes, of course.
Ma'am, most of the palliative care centers are being being supported by FCRA fund.
Yes.
How how the new FCRI account changes affect the palliative care organizations, especially Palliative India? That's my question.
So, you know, the new FCRA amendment has been really tough on a lot of NGOs, especially if you were getting a sub-grant. So are you getting a sub-grant?
A new account is being, suppose.
So when you get FCRA, who do you get the FCRA from? I mean, is it a direct FCRA to you, or is it a sub-grant?
Organization for Palliative India.
Poonam, Dr. Ajayan is a volunteer with Palliative India.
Okay.
So I think this is a more landscape question, Dr. Ajayan.
So Palliative India has an FCRA certificate,
yes.
right?
Yes.
And because Palliative India has an FCRA certificate, it will be able to get its foreign funding still, right? And the rules are now, sorry.
But now we are instructed to open a new account at Delhi.
Yes. So
that
the
will be a problem.
No, the account is to be opened at SBI, right? State Bank of India. There's a very nice, easy, clean process. The application has to be made. And once the application is made, State Bank of India you will have that as your main FCRA account. But then wherever you have your current FCRA account can become a utilization account, right? So that is what CanKids also, we opened an SBI account and we were earlier with Kotak. Now Kotak is our utilization account. So the funds now all have to come into SBI, and from SBI they will do utilization.
Yeah. Can I chip in for a minute? My name is Murli, and I used to be working for State Bank for almost 39, 40 years. Yeah. The last date for opening this account is 31st March. All NGOs who are supported by foreign inward remittances, namely the foreign currency FCRA account, they have to apply for it. Two important changes. One is all the NGOs and societies have to be registered before the 1st of April 2021. That is the latest amendment that Nirmala Sitharaman has given last week, number one. Number two, all FCRA accounts, irrespective of which bank they used to be opening earlier, have to invariably open in State Bank of India, Delhi branch. And they can be operated, like how Madam was saying just now, at different places of convenience where the actual transactions happen functionally. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Okay. If you so require any help, any NGOs that may require help to open an account in the State Bank of India, they can approach me. I know people there in Delhi main branch. I can possibly facilitate it as I've done it for a couple of NGOs here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Murli. That's good news and good to know. Would you like to put I think everybody may have your email ID, but you could put it in the chat for people who might want help. I know that State Bank of India was all of a sudden inundated because they were taken completely unawares when the government came out with this. I also know, and I have to tell you this, the government is really trying, the MHA, Ministry of Home Affairs, is trying to make sure that they actually make the relevant adjustments. We all know why the amendments have come into place. They are all to do around with security issues of the government of India, and respecting that, we have to accept that these are the amendments they have made. The biggest challenge is the sub-grant piece. So if any organization gives sub-grants, that becomes a challenge. The opening at the SBI account, Mr. Murli has generously offered to help. Yeah. And overall, I can say we applied for our account. We got our account a while ago. Palliative has applied, I know. And I think others in the pipeline as well. So I have a feeling that if the 31st March deadline, because SBI is not able to cope with the traffic, then they might extend the deadline.
In all probability, this date is likely to be extended because only about 600 odd accounts have been opened, while there are more than 50,000 accounts yet to be opened.
Yes, that's right. So in all probability, it will get extended, except the government, everybody on tenterhooks.
Yeah.
So, and I have to say that whatever our interaction with SBI was, it was very, very conducive. It was a good interaction.
Okay.
So, yeah. So I hope that answered your question, Dr. Ajay.
Yes, yes, madam. Yes,
Yeah.
madam.
Okay.
I think there may be no hindrance. I think.
No, there are no hindrances. Only thing is, all the trustees who are operating on the NGO have to go in person to sign that account, which will be scanned and sent from the respective branch where it's being operated to Delhi main branch, and they will scrutinize the account opening form, and then they will ask certain questions if required, and then they will straightaway open the FCRA account. That's it. For eventual supervision by the Government of India, Ministry of. So this is also two departments: Ministry of Corporate Affairs and Ministry of Company Affairs. So two departments are involved here. Quite a lot of stringent rules are likely to come in, is what I presume this was going to happen the days to come.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So just wrapping up on the section on making partners, essentially, as I said, there's the who, what, why. There's also trying to understand who are the stakeholders and exactly what are the key issues to consider when identifying a potential stakeholder group, right? I'm not going to go through all the points. The idea was more for the people on the group to understand that oftentimes when we talk about resources, we talk about funds, but actually getting in good partners, having good strategic partnerships can greatly enhance the resources that you have and the stretch that you have. Equally, what's important to take away is that oftentimes we don't see these as stakeholders or we don't see them as partners. But a lot of the times when we work even with media, the media is a partner. We work with schools, the schools are a partner. And the more we recognize that these are partnerships, the more we work on developing it as a partnership, the more we work on, once we have identified it, doing some paperwork around this is the terms of agreement, the less likely it is that the partnership will not work. Otherwise, one of the biggest challenges of working with other people is that we sometimes have different vision, we have different mission, the teams are different. We feel that, you don't have the same level of influence over another partner. And yet, this is so valuable as a resource. So knowing and understanding how to build partnerships, how to make sure that you actually document it well, how to ensure that you're actually, you're understanding what your partner wants and what you want, and you're trying to synergize that is very, very important when we look at building partnerships, right? Let's look at the second section. If anybody has any other question on partnerships, I could take that. Otherwise, we'll just move on to the second section. Any question on the first part on making partners? All right. So the second section is on understanding how to create budgets, allocate your funds, and to raise your funds, right? So anybody wants to tell me why we need to have a budget? And also for all the people who are out there and are from organizations, do you have an organization budget and do you have a program budget separately? If you could just type it into the chat. Is there a response? Okay. So why should you prepare an annual budget, right? Again, now, when you're a smaller organization, often we don't look at preparing a budget. We just get money, we spend it. We get money, we spend it, right? And yet, when you make that budget, it actually sharpens your understanding of your goals, right? It gives you a real picture, right? It shows you what you can afford. It shows you what is the gap in the funding that is available to you. It allows you to decide what you're actually going to be able to do in the given year. I think we must all understand planning. I can tell you my organization has grown quite big, but I'm challenged by the fact that we're not good planners. People who run not-for-profits often are very good at doing activities because we started with the feeling of I want to help. We started with the feeling of I want to serve, right? And we always want to continue to hold that dear to our heart. I want to serve, I want to help. and that's activity, right? But as you grow, you will find that it's not enough to only say, let me get money and spend it. You have to plan, you have to make a budget, and you have to understand how you can make your goals. It's okay. Yes, not having a plan is planning for failure, right? Everybody needs a budget, correct? So, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get this to move. What happened? Yeah. It also encourages effective ways of dealing with money issues, right? So important, and I'm going to say this as well. I have seen in many, many organizations, we know the activities, we make the expense budget, we don't make an inflow budget. We don't look actually at how much money we really have and how much money we can project to have. And so looking at the budget from both sides is extremely important to know how you can actually raise your funds and spend them, right? It also fills the need for required information, because only when you have a completed budget can you start putting out funding proposals. So having a plan in place, having your programs, having your projects, looking at what your outcomes and outputs are important, but equally you can't really put in a funding proposal to anybody if you don't have a budget. Finally, it also facilitates the discussion on what are the financial realities of the organization. So for many NGOs and for many organizations, we often tend to just work on the activity budget. We tend to look at the expenditures. We say, okay, whatever money comes, we'll spend it. We don't necessarily look at corpus. We don't necessarily look at, creating sustainability. And we keep growing till one day it hits us that, we need to start doing this very, very urgently. I'm actually talking about my own organization as well. So very important, right? And equally, making sure that the person who runs the organization, like myself, does not do all the budgeting, actually has somebody to watch your back, right? So this is the pieces for why you should prepare an annual budget. Does anybody have anything more to add on that? Anything else you think that I have missed out on in terms of why we should prepare a budget? So Mr. Murli, you said lest you build nothing. I thought you said lets you build nothing. And I was wondering.
No, there's a sentence about that. See? Yeah. Count your cost before you build.
Okay, absolutely, absolutely. Oh, it's all on top. Yes, count your costs before you build, lest you build nothing. I agree. Yeah. I agree fully. Absolutely. Yeah. So very important to budget. And therefore, let's look briefly at what are the elements of a budget, right? So how many of you here are running organizations out of the people who are attending? There are some 35 people who are participating, I think. Mostly people who are running organizations. Can someone help me with that? Yeah. Are most of the people running their own organizations?
Actually, not running. No one's really running their own organization at the moment.
Working in an organization.
Yeah. Many people are working. And like we met Samuel, he has his own company. So there are a few entrepreneurs like that, but we don't have anyone is running an organization at the moment.
Okay. And yet, whether you're volunteering in the organization or you're an employee of an organization, and be that, be it an NGO, be it a startup, whatever, I think this is something that everybody who works in the setup should know. Right? Just like I think everybody who's in a household should know about budgets. Oftentimes we volunteer in an organization and we don't know anything about the funds or the inflows or what costs what, etc. And I somehow have this strong, deep feeling about this. I often interview people and I'll ask them, do you know what the budget was of your previous organization? And they say no. And I'm like, why don't you know? It's published, it's out there, it's on the website. Why didn't you ask? Are you not curious to know what it is costing you? How are you actually, how the activities are conducted? How are the funds coming in? All of this is very, very important from my point of view, right? So, and how you don't have to have a very complicated budget, though I can tell you that the more you apply for funding, the more you need to be specific in terms of what your budget is and how you're creating it, right? It's also increasingly, I find that as you get into corporate social responsibility, oftentimes your budget is your own, and then the CSR partner wants you to also recast the budget in his framework or her framework. And then that adds to the complexity of your ensuring that your budgets are in concordance with each other. Right?
Can I just also add a couple of points? One is that a lot of people believe that the budget is separate from the vision, but they are deeply intertwined. And if we have a stated mission and a vision, it's only, you know, securing those kind of funds that can allow us to, at different levels, achieve that mission and vision. Yeah. So the two are not separate. It might seem that, you know, the service, the loftiness of the ideal and things like that, but it's rooted in exactly this kind of, I mean, in the budget, in the funding and all of those things. The other thing I just wanted to flag, since the FCRA thing came up, is also that sitting down to create a budget also forces us to think of the larger landscape and, you know, the long game, because now as we see these patterns of funding changing with more and more restrictions coming in for international funding and things like that, we have to pivot now in order to not be blindsided later.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So
absolutely.
those are just 2 points I wanted to make. Yeah.
And I want to reinforce what you just said, right? When I said that knowing if you're working in an organization or participating in an organization in any way, you should know this, because it tells you the breadth and scope of the organization. I think one thing that I've always been mindful of is that I've set up and grown a large organization today, but I need to make sure that it is sustainable. I need to make sure that actually we are not just spending so rapidly that we'll suddenly find that we are no longer able to sustain ourselves. Why is that important? Because we offered a service. If we offered a service today, then you have to offer it tomorrow as well. You cannot walk away one day because you don't have the funds. Oftentimes I find that projects just wind up, and people will say, well, you know, the project wound up because there was no more funding. But what Smriti said is important, that funding is actually creating an activity. It's fulfilling a need. It's providing a service. We undertook to provide the service. We undertook to provide a need, right? So this is, in fact, even more important than within the commercial space, because here we are actually, there could be somebody out there who gets dependent on you for your funding, for your support. There is a hospital that are those 105 hospitals that we partner with. They are now dependent on us for the manpower we provide or for the social support services that we provide. The families who come there are banking on us that they would get that support. So if I suddenly don't have funding and I'm not able to provide the support, it's not that straightforward. It isn't. So knowing how to set up that and knowing how to make sure you don't have to be part of the budgeting, you don't have to be part of the finance, but you should have a knowledge about it. And that's something I'd like to leave everybody with, right? And as Smriti said, more and more, at least for all of us, the environment currently is such that there is huge potential, but at the same time, there are also things, as Mr. Murali just said, it's becoming stringent, it's becoming more particular, ensuring risk, compliance, all of that is becoming more and more important as well. So,
can I add one thing to what you just said? I've just added a link, a small link in the chat box. Perhaps you'll see it. Nirmala Sitharaman, she has very categorically last week said that all societies, trusts, and corporate houses who are involved in NGO activities must register. Even though you are already registered, you must register again before the 1st of April 2021. I think the link that is sent is self-explicit about what should be done. You know?
Yes, there is a form that we are awaiting on the CSR Act, and that form has not yet come in. So it's sort of like touch and go. Everybody is waiting for the form to come in. The form has not been published. We don't know how to register ourselves without the form.
Yeah. Ma'am, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about this, the FCRA thing and whatever funding we're trying to raise, whoever is trying to raise. The new regulations, they look like there's going to be a lot of issues trying to raise funds in the first place. And uh, I'm not against regulations, but what I'm trying to understand is, shouldn't we, people who are trying to raise funds, at least voice our opinion to the government about, our apprehensions? Because if we wait till an act is passed or something like that, it might be too late, because then they're not going to go back on what they've already made. So is this the point of time where we need to ask the government questions saying that, okay, you've done this, we will fall in line with your regulations, but what is the guarantee that you will not keep on adding more and more restrictions when you know that there is a need, you as a government are not able to provide it, when we as a private enterprise or whatever, we are trying to do something for the betterment of those in our country. Don't we have a right in a democracy to even ask them the question?
So I'd
because
like
if
to
we don't say it
clarify
now,
to you.
It might be just too late.
So I'd like to clarify that, in fact, the act was out for public opinion, and a lot of people did. A lot of people gave their inputs. The one that came out apropos of nowhere was the MHA one on the FCRA, right? But I did go into the MHA, so I did speak to people there. I believe that there are no other things coming in on the MHA side, is what they have said. I also understand where these MHA guidelines have come from, right? I think all of us who live in this country kind of understand security issues, etc., right? Also understand where we are at the current moment. I want to say that if I look at my 15, 16 years of experience in the development sector, and I've been a civil services officer earlier, right? So maybe you think I'm biased about the government, right? But when I came in, I was just completely gobsmacked by the lack of governance in the development sector. I was, right? I was like, how can there be no rules? How can there be no, I mean, you, me, perhaps a lot of us are running good not-for-profits, but for the first 10 years, I followed international guidelines. I didn't know what guidelines to follow. So we just adopted international guidelines to make sure that, we were transparent, we were doing things correctly, all of that, right? And yes, I know that to some extent, someone like me and other people on my board, being people from the government, on the Pallium board, being people from the government, it is helpful because then you know how to work with the government. But I have to say that some of what is coming in is required, right? Because for the 30,000 plus not-for-profits that are there in this country, I have seen not-for-profit after not-for-profit, which is completely not in compliance. Right? People are collecting donations. They don't have a 12A, they don't have an ATG, they're collecting donations, right? The entire religious sector, the same story. So what is happening with that, right? What's happening is that people are getting money in and they're not compliant. I see Arya Samaj societies. I live in Delhi, the Arya Samaj society, and I'm asking, my mother became the president, and I'm saying to her, do you not have a Societies Act? Do you not have an MOA? Why aren't you following that, right? But they're all very, very nice people. They're all good people. They're all well-intentioned people. But they have to, if the corporate sector has to be, compliant and the government has to be compliant, why should the development sector not follow proper guidelines, right? So I think some of it is good, what is happening, right? I think making sure that, like, I'll give you another example. There was a point in time when we were smaller and we used to think that we don't need to have the Minimum Wages Act implementation, right? And the government was not that particular back then. The government has also become more and more particular about let's, follow the rules and the guidelines. A not-for-profit can say, oh, why should I pay this kind of salary, right? Why should I pay this minimum wages? Why shouldn't I pay much less because after all, my service is free? There has to be a view about it, right? It's not easy. It's not easy to be compliant, but those rules are for certain people, right? So I want to tell you that a lot of people across the country have put in their points of view. The government has given people opportunities to put this in. I also want to remind everybody here that we're the only country in the world that has a CSR Act. We're the only country in the whole world that has a mandated CSR Act that says that, you know, if you have a net profit of X percentage, you have to put 2% towards corporate social responsibility. And I can tell you that once you've figured out how to get CSR funding, that is such a godsend. It is such a godsend. So for the Ministry of, the MCA and the companies, the Ministry of, what's it called?
Corporate Affairs.
Yeah,
Ministry of Corporate Affairs, yeah.
For the Ministry of Corporate Affairs to come out with some guidelines, rules, and regulations, I think it's important. They initially said you will all have to become Section 8 companies, but then they gave opportunities to people to speak out, and they finally have the act that has come out says, no, you don't need to be a Section 8. You can be a society, you can be a trust, you do have to register, and once you register, we will monitor your projects. Now, I'll accept that, when people monitor, there can be many different points of view of what monitoring is, but can we deny that there should be monitoring? No.
Yeah.
No, in the long run, definitely what you say is right. There has to be monitoring and there has to be guidelines. And in fact, it makes it easier. In the long run, it will turn out more profitable to fall in with the guidelines and work within the framework. Yeah. So that's great. I'm glad you cleared that.
Yeah.
Sam,
I just wanted to put this point of view out there because we're always very good at dissing some of these things and running it down. But I thought a lot about it. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's very, very hard when you're doing charity, when you're doing free services to say, okay, how do I meet compliance for all these various things? But then on the other hand, you say, yes, if you want to actually deliver, then perhaps you have to. Mr. Murli, you were trying to say something.
Yes, what I was saying precisely is on the same lines as you are saying, although Sam has got a genuine, legitimate demand to raise. My point is the NGOs themselves are not able to keep the accounts appropriately clear. For example, you get $100 of FCRA. How is this being actually utilized in terms of productivity? Where have they gone? Where is the receipts? Where is the audit done? Are the balance sheets available? Cash books are not available. And that is there's no big intelligence required. Why is State Bank of India the only bank in the country that the government of India has identified all trust NGOs should be registered here? Open accounts here. Why? As simple as that. Like the government of India wants to have a total view of all the activities happening from foreign funding into India. That's it. As simple as that. So,
and let us recognize that, right?
Yeah, that is
recognize that.
It is
and
good.
Some of us may just be collateral damage, but let's recognize it for what it is, right?
True.
Ma'am, just one thing, what you said about the CSR funding is a great thing because like you rightly said, if India is the only country that is doing that, it's good. Only thing is, I was just wondering whether it is really being implemented the way it can be. And if you could I'm sure somewhere along this, during the session, you will throw some more light on the CSR funding, how even smaller entities, can look at getting involved and trying to get
I will come back to it in the subsequent session. Let's carry on with some of this.
Yeah. So then we don't have to worry about FCRA coming in at all.
No, we have to worry about it. I can tell you this. But yes, let's just move along. I'm not going to take too long over, how you need to set up a budget. I will share the presentation. I'll send it to Pallium and they can send it out to all the participants most happily. That is why I made it a little bit detailed because I considered it almost like a handout that you could use. So this is the bit about how you estimate all the expenses that you need to look at. Almost you brainstorm it and then you categorize it. It's worth it, again, if you are a not-for-profit, to make sure you have at least a volunteer, if not a proper tie-up, to make sure that your financials are correctly done. Your receipting is correctly done. For people who start any such activity, I cannot emphasize enough that this has to be done. I don't think it is fair to take anybody else's money and spend it or use it for a service and then not account for it correctly. I cannot emphasize that enough. And I know that a lot of the time NGOs then start or organizations start and say we're doing service, but you're using somebody else's money. So I remember once a corporate social responsibility partner said, look, they're forcing us to give you 2% of our profits. Why should we not ask you all these questions? Right? So we're taking someone else's funds, we're using them for someone else. We're responsible to the beneficiary, we're responsible to the donor both. And therefore, making sure that your budget, your accounts, your receipts, all of that are correctly done and you are accountable for it. I cannot emphasize how important that is. And it must be done. It's not easy. Finance is not easy for anybody. I still don't understand books. I don't understand accruals. I need help, but I have very good treasurer. I have good finance teams, and that makes this work happen, right? So I have a question from Mr. Bhatnagar, is it? What about just collecting donations and purchase wheelchair that are given to those who can't afford them? Yes, you can do that. And I'll come to that in a minute about donations in kind, right? So as I said, it's easier to create the estimate of expenditure. It's very, very difficult to create an income budget, right? And therefore, it's very important when you make an income budget to create buckets of where all is my funding coming from. What is it that could come from CSR? What is it that can come from individuals? What type of individuals, high net worth individuals or crowdfunding? What is it that can come from a digital campaign? What is it that I can raise from an event? Can I raise from merchandising? And if so, how much? What can I get as donation in kind, right? It's important even to just sit down and brainstorm it before you create this, and do not walk away from making an income budget. It's not easy. It's more difficult to make an income budget because you don't know if the donation will come or not. But as Mr. Murli pointed out earlier, if you don't make this, then you will find that you didn't never build the building, right? So take into account whatever you know about all your funding sources, estimate the amount that you'll be able to raise. What we do in CAN Kids is we say what is committed funding, then we say what is semi-committed, which means we maybe made a proposal, we think it's likely to come at a probability of more than 50%, and then what is potential. I think I'll be able to reach out to these people. I have connects with them, I have contact with them. I know that they're interested in the same sort of funding, the kind of work we are doing, all of that. And so the team sits down and we make a budget which says what is committed, what is semi-committed, and what is potential. We take it to our finance committee, and our finance committee basis that decides what is the budget going to be for the coming year. I think this is extremely important, right? If you charge fees or sell services, estimate the amount you'll take in from these activities. At least for not-for-profits, I can tell you that there is only a certain amount that you can actually sell. Otherwise, you need a GST. So all these rules and you need to check with your chartered accountant or your accountant when it comes to sale of services or charging fees or merchandise beyond a particular amount, right? If you solicit members who pay yearly dues or fees, estimate what that will yield. Sometimes we undervalue what we could get from here as well. Regular, unrestricted giving. So that too, if you're selling items, estimate the sales. If you're subletting or renting space, record what that will bring in. If you have income from investments, estimate what you're going to realize from those. And then estimate the amounts from any other sources that you think you're going to get income from, right? Add up all of this and that'll give you your projected income budget, right?
I have a question.
Yes.
So at what point does social work or charity go from unregulated to regulated? I mean, for example, if I'm doing it on a small scale, can it continue without getting all these licenses and registering the society and whatever we are discussing? At what point does it change from being unregulated to regulated?
So if you are raising money from anybody, you should be registered. Right? Now, if you are spending your own money to help other people and to do social work, then you have to see how it impacts your tax status, right? But if you are raising money from people, now if you say, okay, I took 1,000 rupees from all my neighbors and I bought wheelchairs and I gave the wheelchairs to people, perhaps that would not cover, right? Or if the school children decide to do something small locally, perhaps not. But if you're going to do it regularly, if you're going to do it at any level, even if your budget is 1 lakh a year or whatever it is, I would strongly suggest that it should be regulated.
Okay, so currently it's not, it's done regularly, but not on a very large scale. So
Yeah.
say about 5 chairs a year or 8 chairs a year, depending on the amount of donations we get.
Yeah.
So that's the confusion there, whether to just continue simply doing this without the hassle of getting a CA, getting a lawyer and those expenses, or just register and go ahead.
So I can suggest to you 2 ways. One, I want to tell you that whoever you're taking the funds from, you need to ask them too, right? If they say that we would like a proper receipt, et cetera, then I think it behoves you to regulate it, right? The second thing is you could partner with someone. You can partner with someone. Remember, I talked to you about partnerships at the beginning, right? So when I started Can Kids at the beginning, I used all the plumbing of Indian Cancer Society. I went to them, I said, I'd like to be unit of Indian Cancer Society. They said, yes. We were called Can Kids, Kids Can, unit of Indian Cancer Society. We used their 12A, ATG, FCRA, everything from 2004 all the way till 2012. So it allowed me to do all the work, learn the model, understand it, grow it, do everything. And at the same time, maybe I lucked out. Indian Cancer Society was a fantastic organization which gave you a lot of space and independence to do your own thing. But that worked. It worked really nicely. So I think if you're just doing 5 chairs a year, perhaps it shouldn't matter. It's also a function of, do your donors want receipts, etc. Right? If it's just an activity you do amongst yourselves, perhaps it would be okay.
Yeah, thanks for that. Donors actually don't stress so much for receipt. Rather, they want a confirmation that the funds are going for the purpose they are donating. So if they can actually see pictures of the donation or talk to the person, the recipient, that is enough for them, more than the value of a receipt that will get them some tax exemption from ATG or something like that. No?
Yeah. I can also tell you that you could try, because these days so much of it is online, getting a 12A and ATG, etc. And then the fact of the matter is that if you want any other CSR funding or anything else, even FCRA, you need 3 years of balance sheet. So getting someone locally to help you with even a 12th grade commerce student can make your book if it's that small, right? So if you're thinking of growing your activity in any way, I would recommend that you start the process, right? And in the initial phases, you don't need a big tam-cham to be able to generate a book. Like I told you, a 12th standard commerce student or a college level commerce student can make a profit loss account for you and a balance sheet, etc. So it's not huge amounts of money to begin with, but it allows you then to think about, okay, 3 years from now, if I want to make it bigger, I'll have 3 years of books. Right? Okay.
Yeah, thanks for that suggestion. I think that is an important point.
Yeah. So I'm going to move to the next piece because I think I'm running late anyway, but and I'm not going to spend too much time on the theory because I feel like people have many more questions than, my talking through the theory of what I've put up here. But talking about allocating funds, right? So if we want to, the funds that the budget we have created, and now we're looking at, okay, we're raising funds and we want to allocate the funds, right? So we have to, what do we need the funds for? We have to look at that, right? Are we looking at the funds to run the existing programs, right? Are we looking at funds to keep the programs going, right? Are we looking at funds to deepen the existing program and to improve quality of the existing program, right? The other way of looking at it is, are we planning expansions? So if we're planning expansions, you are looking at, and this is again, harkening back to how you do the budgeting, right? So you look at either what is your existing program? Am I only going to keep it going? Am I allowing for inflation? On the other hand, you're looking at, am I expanding? Am I expanding my services? Or am I planning to expand geographically? Am I planning to grow outside, let's say my small community? Am I planning to go outside my city? Am I planning to go pan-India, etc., right? You also need to allocate funds for strengthening your organization. A lot of NGOs don't do this. A lot of NGOs don't do this, and that is not a good idea, right? To put aside, to make sure that when you make your budget, you have created funds for strengthening the organization to make sure your organization runs. I often tell people who want to set up an NGO or an organization, invest in at least one part-time employee to begin with, so that they can do your paperwork for you, so that they can, they can allow you to be a better volunteer, literally, right? Because as a volunteer, you may have limited time, or as a group of volunteers, you may have limited time. But on the other hand, there's no walking away from what you need to do, right? Whether it is creating awareness, whether it is your finance, whether it is your fundraising, whether it is the documentation, all of that. So please do look at putting money for the strengthening of the organization. And of course, as you start raising more money, putting money into trying to raise more money is also important. Within this, I can tell you that some of the larger NGOs I've found actually spend a lot of money. Their cost of fundraising can be as high as 50%, which to my mind is completely ridiculous. I don't think it's unacceptable at all. Sometimes people come to us and say, we can do this, we can help you raise money, we can do direct marketing for you, etc. And at my organization, we're very, very clear that our cost of fundraising will not go beyond 20%. And that has been from the beginning, from the time we started. So if we do an event as well, we won't spend more than 20% of what we can ultimately raise. And otherwise, our operating costs at CanKids are around 12%. So as a result, we have deliberately stayed away from models of things like direct mailing and face-to-face street funding, etc., where we need large teams and where the cost of fundraising is high. So far, we have tended to work harder on models where the cost of fundraising is a little bit lower, but that does not mean you shouldn't put money into it. You should, so that you can generate. It's like an investment, right? So it is having a good fundraising team, and we'll talk about it in a bit, is also important. And putting aside funds to create sustainability, important. I'm guilty. My organization is guilty of not having a big corpus, but this is the year we've decided that we need to have this corpus to create that sustainability. A big challenge to make this decision, because you always want to do the activities, you always want to expand, right? So Mr. Syed in the chat box has said that he has experience in trust and associations and would like to offer help to anyone who would like it. So from the chat box, please note that down. So coming to the next part, which is understanding fundraising, right? And not-for-profits live by donations from their supporters. The board is ultimately responsible for the well-being of the organization, including income. The board will set up team, a resource mobilization team, but at no point, or a finance team, or both, but at no time can the board of an organization walk away from their responsibility for the financial health of their organization. The same way as I said earlier, that we cannot walk away from our responsibility to be compliant or to be legally correct. You asked the question about when should it move from unregulated to regulated. And I can tell you that I've come across at least 4 organizations in the last 2 years where they've been doing such wonderful work, but they failed to get the paperwork done. So ultimately, this one young lady had to pay some 14 lakh rupees of tax. And she was completely taken aback because she said, but I raised the money and I spent the money on the activity. But because she failed to get her 12A, right? And so she failed to get her charitable status. So she just got taxed on all of it. And there was no walking away from it, right? So there's that too. So here are some steps for designing a good strategy for resource mobilization. First off, plan a strategy. Second off, act on it. Identify who your fundraisers, your partners are. Identify where your resources may come from. Engage with them. Negotiate, manage, and report. And I cannot emphasize the manage and report bit because I can tell you that reporting back to your donors, be they small donors or large donors, is completely vital to your getting funds again, to retaining donors. For one, I think it is only right that you acknowledge people who have helped you. But that apart, if you want to retain your donors, then we're getting back to them and reporting to them. You just talked about wheelchairs. Your donors just want to know that the money reached the right place and the person who you gave the money for benefited. So types of fundraising, and we talked about this a little bit earlier. So I like to put CSR fundraising first because I cannot tell you how grateful I am for the CSR Act. When we started scaling up, I used to wonder where we would raise this money. It was so difficult to go to people and say, can you sponsor an event? Can this come out of a marketing budget? So having the CSR Act for the last 5 years and gearing ourselves to actually figuring out how to show our programs and services as projects and to submit grants in such a way that we are able to get CSR funding has been one of the best things that we have managed to do within resource mobilization. And we don't need a large team. In fact, we have exactly 3 people. But between the 3 people, they're able, this year, they've raised 20 crores plus out of just CSR grants. And what happens with this is that after you've invested in it in the beginning, then your donors, like even in a COVID year, a lot of our CSR partners initially said, we may not be able to help you, but by the middle of the year, they were all back. And some of them have even given us extra funding this month. So this is a partnership I cannot emphasize enough. It's a partnership. Of course, you can only start applying for CSR funding 3 years after, with 3 years of balance sheet. So I think, Shishir, it was you who asked me the question about unregulated to regulated, was it? Yeah. So if you're planning to grow your setup, then it's a good thing. Start creating your balance sheets, right? The next thing we have is going to foundations. Again, while CSR is tough to do because you have to do all the, I mean, you're dealing with corporates, right? And so you have to be almost corporate in the way you work with them. I have a little story of how when we first, one of our first CSR partners was HDFC Life. And I did this wonderful, impassioned, committed presentation for Change for Childhood Cancer in Tamil Nadu. And when I finished, the head of CSR said, Ms. Vagai, you're a very passionate, committed person. And I think you lead a wonderful organization. But how do I go back to Deepak Parekh and tell him these 1,200 children you're asking for the funding for, are they all going to survive? So I said, no, they're not all going to survive. I don't know, the doctors treat the children. So he says, you have to show me impact measures. You have to show me outcomes. You have to show what is your output. Only then can you get this funding. So I went away and I talked to my board members, and then one of my board members is a corporate guy, and he said, okay, I think all these corporate guys like ladders and numbers and ladders and slides. So then I talked to a lot of people all over the world, and we converted our work into a ladder, 2 ladders showing how we moved from 0 to 100%, and with lots of numbers, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been hard work, but then the more you end up with CSR partners, the more they help you. They want you to succeed as well. So they'll often show you how to do your log frames, how to actually show impact better. I know at Pallium, we were applying for an Azim Premji Foundation fund. And I think the 6-8 months that it took us to make it through was huge learning. Was it not, Smriti? Right?
It was. Yeah, they laid us down bare to the bone, but it was a very, very healthy exercise for us.
Yeah, and good for us because it'll help us get more funding, right? Because we moved from being a Seva organization into an organization that wants to work across the country and that wants to scale up and wants more funding. And so having that help from them and they're pushing us was very, very good. So I think that a lot of the time, then they send in their donor auditors, and a lot of the time their donor auditors are much bigger than your own auditor. So it's either a Deloitte or a PwC or KPMG, and they come with complicated log frames. But there's good learning there too, and we learn from it and say, okay, we know how to do Seva. Now some corporate guy is teaching us how to do the rest of our work. But at least that way we're able to, it becomes a win-win on both sides, and we benefit. We benefit because we start running a better and better operation ourselves. So foundations don't ask that many questions mostly. So if you can luck into getting foundations to support you, that's good. HNI giving. HNI giving is very, very useful again. Again, not too many questions, easier to do, but harder to do because most of the HNIs in India, especially, are already tied up to some philanthropic activity already. Or they may start off with wanting to help a lot of causes, and then suddenly they grow passionate about that one thing, be it Uttarakhand or sanitation or whatever, and then that's it. Then they pull the plug on everybody else. So event fundraising, I find event fundraising hard because it takes up everybody in the organization to organize an event. And oftentimes the cost is there, and unless you can have enough funds generated, it can be a lot of work and not enough funds generated, or the cost becomes too high. So we do, in CanKids, we have one event which we call our Access to Care Car Rally. And because it's also about creating awareness, it's also about talking about access. We also do a lot of, we take all our survivors with us. So at least to that extent, it's not just fundraising, it's actually programmatic as well. And it works really well for us. So we are able to get, in fact, some CSR funding for it as well. So the event that we have cobbled together is good. And that apart, I can suggest that piggybacking on some of the kind of events that are already there, for instance, the Tata Mumbai Marathon, or there's that Battle of Buffet in Chennai. These kind of events where somebody else is doing all the plumbing and all the hard work is really worth considering. Because you may think, oh, I have to give 6 or 7 or 8% to the organizer, but actually it's well worth it. It saves you so much effort, and especially if you have a relatively lean organization, it makes sense to participate in these events, right? If you do have, again, partnerships is great for events. So for instance, if you have school partners, let the school organize your event and you do your piece and you raise a lot of money through that too. So in the space of events, I would like to suggest to everybody that look at who you could partner with to do an event. Whether you're the junior partner or the senior partner, it doesn't matter. But what's important is that unless, or you have volunteers who say, okay, we'll run this event, right? And let them do it. Otherwise, I find it distracts us too much from our real work to do an event. And everybody loves an event, so everybody wants to participate. Do tell me if you feel differently, right, as I go through this. So crowdfunding and online giving, oh my God, this has become like quite the thing, right? Online giving, crowdfunding. I can tell you we decided about 2 years ago that we needed unrestricted giving, because don't forget, CSR fundraising or grant fundraising is restricted. It's restricted to the project, right? But every organization needs unrestricted giving, correct? So if you need unrestricted giving, which allows you to scale up, which allows you to have general funds, etc., then crowdfunding, online giving, these are good things to do. Events also. Now, crowdfunding, online giving, again, I would So we have actually partnered with Milap. We have partnered with Give India. Both work quite nicely for us. During COVID, we were able to deal with COVID because we had a great Milap campaign that raised us some 55 lakh rupees. So that was great. I can tell you, however, that if you want to get into this, you need someone who understands social media and digital, right? So we currently have this great advisor who really gets it, right? And I found that this particular last 6 or 8 months, the reason why it's been so good is because of him. Because he'll push us into making the right campaign. He's on Facebook, he'll do all that. He's a senior guy. He used to be the CEO of a company earlier, and then, so we lucked out in having him with us. But I saw the difference between what we were trying to do earlier and what we're doing now. So this one to me is, it works if, how does something go viral, right? It's around that. How you do the campaign, what is your call to action? Have you made it catered to the right audience? Is your message clear? Is it making people want to give? And have you plugged it enough? All that becomes relevant. So I don't know, does anybody have another experience to share about this crowdfunding and online giving? Anyone? Anybody who's done really well with it the last couple of years? Nobody?
I think in the last session, we had a couple of people. I think it was the Milap people who came on board, and a video was shown, and we saw people who were benefited by using their services.
Yeah. So I can tell you again that, like, if we want to work with Milap or with Give India, again, you need to have, as I said, we have a very good volunteer. He does a lot of this work for us. So because it is time consuming, doing crowdfunding or online giving requires you to be very, 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 very active on social media, chasing all the money, all of that all the time. And I said the cost of fundraising is anywhere between 9 to 15%. There's that too. If you do it on your own website, if you have a payment gateway, yes, that works. But after a point, you don't know how to go into a new database. And this is where we are currently exploring that. We've taken the year and we've divided it up into Tata Mumbai Marathon at the beginning of the year. Let's do a Milap campaign after that. At around March, April, we'll do one with Give India. At Diwali, we do our own in-house festive season campaign where we reach out to friends and family for, Diwali giving. And then at the end of the year, we've planned a winter giving overseas because Christmas and everything. So if you have foreign donors and foreign funders, then that would work. So we've actually planned it out through the year, and that's how we're trying to work at it. But we're still, you need to know that you'll get all the relevant information. So for instance, there's a Facebook donate page, but Facebook will not give you the data. They don't collect the data. So they can't give you the data about the donor. So a lot of Facebook donate could end up being anonymous giving. And that could be a challenge, right? So,
Hi, Madam Poonam.
Yes.
Can I share something with you right now? Because we're talking about collecting data regarding donations. State Bank of India has got a app called a State Bank Collect.
Okay.
All that is required is some documents they ask for. They do have their website. On their website page, you can go and make the payment, and they'll give you all the database and who has paid in the money, and on a daily basis they can give you a report, and all that can go in for a lot of benefit. It saves on you yourself making connection with the website, for payment, as a payment gateway. They do they take the responsibility of a payment gateway. That's what I want to say.
SBI Collect.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So we use InstaMojo on our website, and they give us all the information as well. So, but we can explore it, and the others on the group, please keep a note. You could explore it. I don't know what is the payment gateway fees for SBI Collect? Do you know the payment gateway fees, Mr. Murali?
That is 1% is what they charge.
Oh, 1% is really low. I think we should just switch to SBI Collect. All right, thanks for that tip. We'll have a look at it.
Poonam ma'am, we have 5 minutes left.
Yes.
So are the participants okay with like 10 more minutes? If you're okay, can we extend it a little bit, the session?
Sure.
Yeah, and I'm quite happy to share the presentation, and we could do some more talking. If people have more questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Or you gave me a structure to deliver a talk on, and so I've stuck to your curriculum. But I'm quite happy to talk about any other questions anyone may have on, resource mobilization, or if you want me to talk a little bit more about CSR Act and all of that, I could do that. What would you like?
Madam, what about the auditing of this fund? Being the vice chairman of Value India, what is your opinion about the auditing system, especially social auditing? It is high time to think about the social auditing. What is your personal opinion?
About social auditing?
Yes, yes.
So I think currently there is a lot more that we are doing in terms of financial auditing. Social auditing requires a much more in-depth discussion. I can tell you some social auditing has been done by our donor auditors. I think that it is very, very useful. I also think that the board is actually mandated, and I'd said this earlier, that the board is responsible for the well-being of the organization. So being able to do it is important, but I can also tell you that it is easier said than done. Very few people know how to do social audit work, right? And therefore, if I wanted to get a social audit done for CAN Kids or for Pallium India, I would really have to look hard to find someone to do it. It's not that easy. People are not so much into understanding. Even we have an internal auditor. We have discussed social audit with him as well, right? But social audit means the entire spectrum of audit, right? From government to program to quality, to be able to look at, both the inflow and the outflow, to be able to look at, are you really efficient or not, right? And the expertise is very low in the country for social audit. Wouldn't you agree with me?
Expense as well as the outcome.
Yeah.
That will be very difficult. That I know. Yeah. Even though with the help of volunteers, you can think of it.
I suppose we could. And I think, Smriti, please correct me if I'm wrong on this. I think there's been a lot of introspection lately, and we've done as I told you, with the Azim Premji grant, we started off the work on actually looking at a lot of things in a different way. And I think the last couple of years at Pallium, we have put in a lot of energy. Harsh has come in, a lot of people have come in, and we've actually looked much more deeply at what we are doing, how meaningful it is, what are the right organizational structures, are we actually raising money correctly, spending it correctly. So internally, we have truly worked at strengthening the organization. I'm not convinced that the time has come for us to do a social audit at Pallium. I also would like to see who we could find to be able to do that social audit. Smriti, you want to add in?
Yeah, you're right, Poonam. I think it's been a 360-degree introspection, both in terms of our outward-facing mission as well as how what goes on within the organization. Strengthening is one thing. We're also restructuring a lot of the ways in which we have been approaching things, I think it's been a tremendous exercise, which is still ongoing. So the number of meetings, the amount of effort that we're putting in right now, I think is unprecedented. It was the Azim Premji audit, it was the pandemic, it was just our goals for the next 5 years, 10 years. So yes, we're going through a massive overhaul, and I agree that we're not at this point where a social audit can be done to any, it can't be done accurately or conclusively at this point because we're still in flux.
I think before we did a social audit as well, perhaps in the next year or two, we should look at getting our, getting the organization rated. Yeah. That helps. And then once we have worked towards getting a rating, then the next step would be to get an audit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Right. So I'm going to end with 3 assignments that I've left for you to do just in terms of a revision. But also I'll send the presentation to the team and they'll circulate it to you. And we talked about resource mobilization partners. So do spend some time on the what, why, and who of this. And remember how important it is to look at everybody who you're working with and say, do I have the right partners? Can I actually improve my functioning or achieve my goal better if I partner with other people? The second assignment is around your budgets. So do you have a budget in place for the year? Have you created a chart of accounts to properly map your budget and expenditures, right? I think this is very, very important. And I know that at Pallium, I have mentioned also that we should look at this in a better way, because the better we do our financial accounting, the better we're able to actually dovetail it into the working of the organization. And then have you looked at the budget? Yes.
Hello, my name is Avtar. Ma'am, I just want to ask one question. The question is that as we are going to start an organization, we are just as starters. So for starters and all, we don't have any reputation to maintain, to generate funds and all. We only need, we don't have any sort of reputations and all. So what kind of resources we can use to maintain our funds and all? Can you suggest on that? So, how can we generate funds?
If you are just starting up, and are you starting up as a company or as a trust, as a society?
As a trust, as a society, ma'am.
As a society. So yes, whatever I have spoken about in terms of fundraising applies whether you are starting fresh or whether you are further down the road, right? And as I said, it would be useful for you to sit down and figure out firstly, and that budget helps in the beginning, especially when one starts out, at least looking at what are your activities, what do you want to do, and creating a budget around them is a great place to start. So once you have created your budget and you've said, okay, these are the activities we want to do, this is the kind of money it will cost, that is when you then start doing the exercise in terms of, okay, let me start thinking, where will the income or the funds for this come from, right? And earlier, I have a slide earlier where I've actually given some of the steps. So when you sit down with the steps in front of you and actually go back to, I'm sorry, I don't think I should be doing this. I have a slide which says what are the steps for trying to decide where your funds are coming from, right? So I would like to suggest to you, you did that, right? Once you have done that and thought through, this is the strategy that I have, then you can look at, okay, where can I raise this money from, right? And again, I'm quite happy to, maybe slot a session just with you once you have done that much, and I could perhaps give you some ideas on where and how and what you can do. It depends on where is your organization? Where's your society? Where is your society?
Avtar, we can't hear you. Can you unmute?
In Chandigarh, ma'am.
In Chandigarh. Okay, I go a lot to Chandigarh as well. So how about you do this for me? If you can, my email ID is, we're putting it into the chat. And if you want to write me, yeah, my email ID is already there in the chat. Plus, I'll put it at the back of the presentation as well. So if you get in touch with me, but before you do, write down all the activities you are planning for the year, write down what you think it is going to cost you, try to make a budget, and try to see also where all you think your money could come from, whatever you can think, right? I have given you some categories for the different categories where you can raise money in India. And whatever you can think, okay, maybe I can raise some money from individuals, maybe I can raise some money by partnering with schools, all of that. If you've done that much work, then I'm quite happy to do a session with you and give you some more ideas. Would that be helpful?
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Okay. And the third assignment I had for you was exactly this. There you go. Here is your assignment, Mr. Avtar Singh. Define a strategy, write down what resources you require. Then we can look at what are the resources. Then we can look at how you're going to raise those resources. And we're going to decide the most effective way to raise funds for you. So you and I are going to do your third assignment together. Yes?
Okay, ma'am.
All right, so I'm at the end of my session. I want to thank you very much. I've enjoyed interacting with all of you. If anybody has any questions, I think I can take a couple of questions with the permission of the team.
Yes, sure. Any more questions from the participants?
All right, I think everybody's delighted to get rid of me. So thank you. I've enjoyed the session as well. And I'll wait to hear from Mr. Avtar Singh and to help him with his resource mobilization strategy. By the way, Mr. Avtar Singh, what is your society going to do?
Ma'am, we are going to take care of patients for palliative care. We are going to work. And we are working, we are trying to coordinate with the palliative care department of PGI. And we are taking care of 3 or 4 patients right now. And we are providing them
6 lakh.
Okay.
So we are focusing on that, and that's why I'm learning this from Palindia how to do all these things.
All right. So then I'm quite happy to help you, and we'll share the presentation with Palindia, and they can share it with all of you. Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Poonam.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Right.
Thank you, Mrs. Poonam. This has been good hearing from you. I think we may require your help in any case for so many other activities around it.
Most happily. Most happily. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We don't have questions because you did such a good job of, bringing us up to speed on all these things. So it's new to us as individuals. So it's good that we had somebody like you with experience telling us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Poonam ma'am.
Thank you.
For the session. So next week we have a session on community mobilization. I'll be sharing the PPT and the required information with all of you. Thank you all. Have a lovely weekend. See you all soon. And I'll be sharing the feedback as well on the WhatsApp group. See you. Thank you.
Thank you.